Hello, and welcome to today's Understood Expert Chat. My name is Matt, and I'm the field manager for Understood's mobilization team. And today we're going to be talking about how to incorporate strengths into your child's IEPs. And we're very happy to have with us Melissa Turner. Melissa is the senior state policy manager for the National Center for Learning Disabilities, which is one of Understood's founding partners. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you to everyone who's joining. I know it's back to school time and everyone's really busy. So thank you.
And it's also hot, so I hope you're standing in the air conditioning today. So real quick before we get started, if you have any questions, there's a chat box to the right of the screen. You can ask them there and we'll get those questions to Melissa. And with that, I think we'll dive in. So today we're going to be talking about strengths-based IEPs, but before we kind of get into it, would you mind defining the term? What are strengths-based IEPs?
That's a really important question, Matt. So strengths-based IEPs, everyone on the phone, I'm going to make an assumption, has some familiarity with the concept of an IEP in general, this individualized education program under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So every child who has a disability, according to that federal law, should be getting an IEP in their public school system. In a regular IEP, standard IEP that most of you are familiar with, you go to your IEP meeting, there's a discussion about what kids are struggling with, what they can't do, where they're not successful. A lot of times those meetings focus almost entirely, actually, on the things that kids can't do. Strengths-based IEP actually flips that on its head. And so this concept says that IEP teams should really be focusing on what kids can do, what they know, what they like to do, where they're strong, and then try to incorporate those skills into the IEP. And by using the areas where kids are stronger, can help them grow in the areas where they need to.
That's a really helpful overview. Thank you for that. So we know what strengths-based IEPs are. Why are they good specifically for kids with learning and attention issues?
So one of the things that we hear from parents in the field is that even if their districts are talking about strengths during the IEP meeting, a lot of times they're talking about them in very generic terms. So some of you may be familiar with this term. We've heard a lot of parents say, oh, when we talk about strengths, what the teacher says is that my daughter is sweet, or my son is quiet. And those are really kind of more things that might be good about your child, but not necessarily things that they are good at. So there's a difference there. When we say strengths, we don't mean what the teacher likes about your child. We mean what your child is good at. The benefit of talking about strengths-based IEPs for kids with learning and attention issues is that it's multi-pronged, I guess. Number one, it can really change the tone of an IEP meeting so that everyone really starts with this idea of what is a child good at, because every child is good at something, right? So that's one. The other reason it's really important is that it can foster self-confidence for students. What I mean by that is if we start from where students are strong, we give them some success to start with, which gives them a little bit more confidence to go into the challenging tasks that they have to do. So they build self-confidence and self-advocacy skills. And finally, strengths can be a way to support student growth and can really create a solutions-oriented IEP process that helps teachers know how to best support a new student.
I love what you said, every child is good at something, because it's absolutely the case, and figuring out how to identify that and use that can be such an important piece of this process. So thank you for that. The next question I wanted to ask you was, how does this, what differentiates a strengths-based IEP from a standards-based IEP?
So strengths-based IEPs, that's a very good question, Matt. In recent years, a lot of schools have focused on standards-based IEPs, and that fits a lot with broader federal education policy, pushing to make sure that all kids are learning grade-level standards. Strengths-based IEPs do not contradict a standards-based approach to IEPs, and in fact, the two can really complement one another. A standards-based IEP makes sure that kids are working towards grade-level skills and content. I think everyone on the phone can agree that that's a really helpful goal for students. Adding strengths to that means that schools are really using what kids are good at to help support them to get to those grade level skills. So the two things are not exclusive. You can do them both together, and in fact, you would really want to do both. A strengths-based IEP without the push towards grade level standards might not actually support a child's growth and development in the ways that we would want it to. So you really want both to happen at the same time.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful. I think a few people in the community might be having trouble with video or audio, so just know that if you do miss any of this, we'll be archiving the video later today, which I realize might not be helpful for the people without video or audio, but we're going to push on. So my next question for you then is, what parts of the IEP can address a child's strengths?
Sure. Oh, you broke up there at the end, but I think you asked what parts of the IEP can address a child's strengths?
Yes.
Okay. So there's many, many ways that an IEP can address a child's strengths. Some of them are more formal than others. And so the first part is really during the meeting. Districts and schools and parents can start every IEP meeting by talking about what kids are good at. By starting from that place, that gives the opportunity to then weave those strengths throughout the IEP. And so you start with the conversation, you identify the strengths together, and then you figure out how to incorporate it concretely and formally in the written document. Couple of different places you can put that. Every IEP includes a discussion about a child's present levels of performance. In there, you can definitely talk about the areas where your child excels relative to the areas where your child does not excel, where they struggle. That's one area. Another is when talking about goals. We want our goals to be really strong. We want them to be grade level and all of those things, but you can include strengths in an IEP goal. Doing so actually will help a teacher in the future kind of tailor instruction and be aware of what your child is good at. And you can also think about strengths when talking about the accommodations that your child will need either in the classroom or potentially on assessments. It makes sense for those accommodations to be helpful for a student, and for them to be helpful, it should be somewhat related to the areas where they are stronger.
Great. So what I want to turn to is, teachers are the experts in teaching, school psychologists are the experts in that, but really parents are the experts in their child. And so when we talk about these strengths, how should parents figure out what their child's strengths are that they can then bring to these meetings?
That's another really good question, Matt. Children have strengths across all kinds of domains, right? There are academic strengths, social strengths, and so, creative strengths. And so as parents, you see your child most often not in the school setting, and teachers really only see your child in the school setting. And so a couple of different things, there are on Understood, there's a list of strengths, just to give you some ideas to get you to start thinking about those things and to think about where your child excels. So I would look for that list, which I think hopefully they will post in the chat box for you. There's also some other different resources on Understood that can help you start this process. Once you've started to think through the areas where you believe your child is particularly strong, it makes a lot of sense to talk to your child's teacher. And I say this because the way that your child behaves at home and the skills that they exhibit at home are really, really important, but there may be other skills and strengths that your child is exhibiting in the classroom that the teacher might be able to point out to you. And so it's worth talking to your child's teacher to see if he or she has identified any particular strengths for your child, and just starting there from an open and frank conversation.
Yeah, keeping those lines of communication open with the teachers, with the school is so important. So thank you for that. Our next question is actually one of our parents watching, Marcia, kind of scoops me in my next question. But she asks, so it's back to school. So how can we integrate this conversation? She asks how we can integrate this conversation into a meeting that has maybe a more traditional approach. So given that it's the beginning of the school year and we want to have those conversations up front, how can we get these strengths into the child's IEP, and how would you kind of approach that conversation?
So back to school is a fantastic time to start this process because your child has new teachers, maybe is in a new school building, and whereas your previous year teacher, hopefully was then aware of your child's strengths and skills, the new teacher really doesn't know, especially if you currently have a very traditional IEP that doesn't focus on strengths. So now is a great time to start by having those conversations. And to your point about, if the school has a very traditional process, how do I start this? It makes sense to me that you would start by talking to that classroom teacher before the IEP meeting. And part of that is just sharing tips and tricks for working with your child. The things that, will help a teacher to know where your child is strong just as much as it will help them to know the areas where your child needs to learn and grow. And so I would start and talk to the teacher, casual conversation, and just say, listen, here are some things we want you to know about our child. That way the teacher is primed for when you get to that IEP meeting. You have an opportunity as a parent to weigh in, and you have an opportunity to say, and I know this is hard, so, please bear in mind that I know this is a challenge, what I'm suggesting that you do. But in that IEP meeting, when you have the opportunity to speak, you can say, is it possible that we can go around the room and talk about some of the areas where my child is doing well? Some of the strengths that he or she brings from the previous year's learning, for example. Ask the question. I know it's hard, especially if you're in a new school and there are new staff there that you haven't been working with over the years. It's a challenge, but ask the question. I think people will be pretty receptive to it. It might take them a second to flip the switch in their brain to say, oh, I was going to say that they're struggling in math. It might take them a second to come up with what those strengths are. And so again, if you're going to ask that question, I do advise that you've done a little bit of thinking on your own so that you can throw out a couple of examples of areas where your child excels or particular interests, just to kind of start that conversation. So that's what I would say. Number one, talk to your child's new teacher. Number two, do a little research and thinking about what your child's strengths are. And then number three, when you get to that IEP meeting, ask the question and start the conversation.
Yeah, I love the way you put that in. I mean, let's acknowledge that this is hard. None of this is easy. It's a very complicated process, but one which, if you're prepared for and going into it, empowered, can end up having real tangible success for you and your child. So thanks for framing it that way. So what I want to move on to now is, we've talked about how to get strengths kind of integrated into your child's IEP, but let's talk about this on like a bit of a larger scale. So what are some things parents can ask schools or districts to do to implement strength-based IEPs, maybe on a slightly larger scale?
Yeah, so I think if you are the parent who's already gone in and said, let's talk about what my kid is good at the beginning of that IEP meeting, you've already done that, you've addressed it in your child's individual IEP, there's an opportunity to ask your school, and when I say your school, I mean your school principal, your classroom teacher. You can talk to your school district's special education coordinator. Different school districts around the country call that person something different. So sometimes it's the special ed coordinator, sometimes it's the director of special ed, sometimes it's exceptional student services. So it's up to you to figure out who that person is. But you can ask any of those people to really do any of these things that I'm going to list out. One of those things you can ask your school to do is to start every IEP meeting with a discussion of strengths. If they're willing to do it for your child, they should be willing to do it for all students who have IEPs. That's one. Another, you can ask the school to update their IEP forms. You all have seen the IEP forms that your children's IEPs are written on. Many of those forms around the country don't say anything about strengths. And we all know that the things that we have to write down or record or get measured on, the goals that we get tracked on at work and all of those things, that's what actually gets done. So if it's not written on that form, it's much more challenging for parent to get it included in the actual IEP. So that's another thing you can ask for, an update to the form. If you want to go really big, you can ask schools to train teachers on how to do this, how to consider a child's strengths, how to write IEP goals around those strengths. And that's definitely a bigger ask. That's thing you could ask definitely district director or school board even would be the right lever for that. And so, those are a few of the things. The last one I would say is that you can ask your school to share information about strengths with all parents, actually, parents of kids with disabilities, but also parents of all children, because again, all children, whether they have an IEP or not, they have areas of strength and they have some areas where they need to grow. Whether they have learning retention issues, whether they don't, all kids exhibit a whole profile of skills and abilities. And so this focus on strengths is something that can apply outside of the special education and 504 system.
And if you do go big and go talk to the district, let us know how it goes. We want to know what your experience is like because we think this is really important. So thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions coming in. First one is from Sally, and Sally just asks, maybe you could give an example of a strength in particular and how we might weave it in, kind of getting down to brass taxes.
That's a really good question, Sally. So first, I will say that we have on Understood, if you go to, and hopefully someone will put this in the chat box for you all, if you go to u.org/school-wide, that's one word, school-wide, you will come up with a toolkit that's focused on strengths-based IEPs and a couple of other strategies that work for kids. And in that toolkit, there are some examples of goals and ways to incorporate strengths that are really concrete, but I'll give one here as well. You might have a child who is really struggling with mathematical expression, meaning when given a math problem in straight numbers, like 2 times x equals whatever, they struggle with that, figuring out what that means and how to get an answer to that. That same child might be really good at reading comprehension. There's an opportunity there for the school to try to use word problems to help the student understand. So whereas for most kids, they learn the numerical expression first. That's just how schools usually teach these things. So they give you the, 5 + 4 = blank, and they give that to kids first. For other students, it might make sense to start with if you have 5 crayons and you get 4 more, how many do you have? And giving the child the ability to read that might help them. And so to get at what I mentioned a little bit before, the building of confidence, if it's a student who has struggled with using the numbers in that way, and you give them a math problem, they might kind of turn off a little bit, right? A student might get disheartened or feel stressed at the concept. But if they're a good reader and you give them a word problem and they have success reading it first, they might then be better able to attack the math problem with a little bit more confidence. I hope that's a helpful explanation, but also definitely take a look at the toolkit and the other resources that we have that give more examples.
It was helpful for me, so I hope that it was helpful for you, Sally, as well. We have another question. Marcia is asking another question, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, but it's essentially, how soon is too soon to have this conversation around strength-based IEPs? I think she's a little concerned about being pushy.
Well, I think it depends on your personal parenting style. So, keep that in mind. If there are parents who reach out to the school as soon as they know who the teacher is going to be that come in the next year. There are parents who wait for their child to kind of settle in for a couple weeks and then reach out. I think in terms of having the informal conversation with the teacher, that it's really up to you. I don't know that there's an answer that is too soon. If it's more comfortable for you to wait till back to school night, or, you can. At the same time, the sooner you make contact with the teacher and start having those conversations, the sooner he or she is going to be able to really tailor instruction to meet your child's needs. And so if you think about it this way, the teachers have 25, 30 kids in their class. A handful of those kids will have IEPs, and so the teacher hopefully has read those IEPs before school starts. But we also know that some schools, that timing doesn't match up in that way. And so as a parent, sending a quick note even just to say, hey, my daughter Susie is in your classroom. She has it, and here's a copy of it, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about her needs. I think that would be viewed as pushy. So it just depends personality and when you feel most comfortable. But I think if you frame it as, I just want to work with you to make sure that we're all clear on how to help Susie the best, and come at it from that place, I think you'll be okay.
Marcy, I'm not sure if your daughter's name is Susie, but it sounds like Susie has a really good advocate. So thanks for that. We have time for one last question. And just if people are looking for more information about strengths-based IEPs or the IEP process overall, where would you send them?
Sure. That's a good question. Send people to a couple of places. The toolkit that I mentioned, u.org/school-wide, is one. In that toolkit, you've got a fact sheet about strengths-based IEPs. You have some talking points that you can use with your school about strengths-based IEPs, and you even have a letter that you can send. You can copy and paste it into an email and send it to your district to ask for a meeting to talk about this. So that's all there to help support you in your advocacy. There's also an article on Understood. Hopefully, again, this will make it into the chat. It's u.org/SB, like strengths-based, -IEPs, like IEPs. So hopefully that will also make it in there. And that article is the one that has a couple of examples of IEP goals that include strengths and some of the benefits of including strengths in IEP. So those are the two main resources. There are a few others on Understood. The Strengths Finder that we talked about, the list of potential strengths that are just really fascinating list to look at, even to think about your own strengths in addition to your children's strengths. There's also a personal narrative from Kevin Hager, who was our managing director at Understood, and he talked about the benefits for him personally of when his IEP team as a child started to focus on his strengths and how that improved his educational outcomes and confidence through school. So that's another really helpful piece for you all to take a look at.
Thanks so much, Melissa. We had a couple of questions from Lori and Jella that were a little outside the scope of today's chat. So before I say goodbye, I will say that we have an online community of parents and experts at u.org/community, where if you have those sorts of questions, I really encourage you to check that out. I think you'll get some really great answers there. But other than that, Melissa, I want to thank you so much. Your answers were so helpful to myself and also a lot of parents who are watching.
Well, thank you for having me. And again, to the parents who joined, I know it's so busy. Thanks for joining.
And just so everyone knows, we do have daily expert chats. If you want to see our full list of chats and also view all of them in our archive, you can go to u.org/calendar. Thanks so much for joining us and have a great day.